Welcome to the Mama Village podcast, your go-to resource for all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. From positive and informative stories to expert advice, this platform is designed to help you feel informed and remove fear as you journey through motherhood. Join this community as we share stories that warm the heart and expert insights that inform the mind. I'm your host, Ellen. Before we delve into today's episode, the Mama Village would like to take a moment to acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the land in which we gather, work and share these stories across many lands in Australia. The Mama Village recognises the traditional custodians of the land and recognises their enduring connection to this country and extends our respects to elders past, present and emerging. It is important to recognise that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women cultivated a profound connection between birthing and the land. For generations, these communities have woven birth stories into the fabric of their cultural identity, creating a tapestry of knowledge that transcends time. As we explore birth stories and education, we acknowledge the importance of preserving and revitalising traditional birthing culture, recognising the profound impact it has had on the understanding of birth as a sacred and deeply spiritual experience. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Mama Village podcast. I am so excited today because I am bringing you a truly extraordinary episode. So today I have the privilege of speaking with Georgia, a mother of three who shares her surprise twin birth story. That is just totally mind-blowing to me. And as soon as I heard about Georgia's story, I reached out and messaged Georgia and said, please come on the Mama Village podcast. Your story sounds so inspiring and I would love to share it with you, the listeners. So not only does Georgia share with us her twin free birth story, but she also shares her first birth story. So Georgia's journey begins with a traumatic first birth experience, which was marred by fatphobia, weight stigma, and coercion. But despite having unwavering faith in her body's ability, she faced fear and skepticism from the medical staff as she went past her due date. Georgia's story of being seen as difficult for advocating for herself and her baby is both shocking and totally heartbreaking. She endured forceps being used without her consent, an experience that left a lasting impact. But where Georgia's story truly evolves is in a powerful turn of events where she chose a different path for her subsequent pregnancy. She embraced a virtually wild pregnancy, placing complete trust in her body and intuition. Her decision led to an awe-inspiring free birth and, to her astonishment, a surprise twin birth. Georgia shares the moments of sheer disbelief when she realized that what she thought was the placenta was actually a second baby. Throughout our conversation, Georgia opens up about her decision-making process around free birth, her deep sense of knowing that it was the right choice for her and her babies, and the profound strength she had and found in honoring herself. We also touch on the sensitive topic of infant death and how her experience shaped her views on childbirth and autonomy. Join us as we deep dive into Georgia's incredible journey, exploring themes of advocacy, self-trust, and the transformative power of birth. This episode is a testament to the strength and wisdom of mothers, and you won't want to miss it. Please don't forget that if you like the show, subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform. By leaving ratings and reviews, it helps get these positive stories and education out there for all women to enjoy, because I am so determined to create a positive birth movement. So let's dive into Georgia's inspiring story on the Mama Village podcast. Welcome to the Mama Village, Georgia.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on here today. Do you want to start by telling the listeners a bit about yourself? So your age, where you live, and who is in your family?
Well, I'm Georgia. I'm 31, and in my little family, it's me, my partner, Zave, my first daughter, Bo, she's 3, and the twins now, Freddie and Eugene.
Oh, beautiful. What a lovely family. So you said your eldest is 3, is that right?
Yeah.
And how old are Freddie and Eugene now?
They just turned 11 weeks.
Wow, so special.
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to talk about the birth of Freddie and Eugene, which I'm super excited to get into. Do you want to talk about how you were feeling in pregnancy first? So did you do anything to prepare to conceive?
No, not particularly. Yeah, so my birth with Bo was quite traumatic. So I think any preparation I did before conceiving again was just spiritual and mental, really. Yeah, and when I conceived the boys, that wasn't planned. We were sort of neither here nor there. We figured we would have more kids at some point, and we just left that up to fate, really.
Yeah, sure. And do you want to talk a little bit about how the birth of Bo was traumatic for you?
Yeah, so her birth had a massive impact on me. I'll try to keep it brief because it is a pretty long and convoluted story, so I won't get
Sure.
into all of it. But yeah, I faced during that pregnancy just a lot of fat phobia, a lot of weight stigma, just basically every interaction that I had along that journey with any birth professional or medical professional was just their entire understanding of me was based on this one facet of how my body looked. And it was based purely on how I looked because I didn't weigh myself. I hadn't weighed myself for about 5 years at that point. So, and I wasn't weighed throughout my pregnancy. So yeah, I was deemed high risk from early on, just purely based on my BMI, calculated off an estimated weight because I didn't weigh myself. And yeah, then I ended up going past my due date with Bo. So then there was a lot more fear from the hospital about that as well. And they were really pushing for induction. And I just knew that I didn't want one. I'd wanted to go through the birth centre, but I'd been risked out. So yeah, from the beginning, I knew that I really wanted as natural a birth, as physiological a birth as possible. And I had the utmost faith in my body, but nobody else did. So ultimately, I went to 43 weeks with Bo and I did go into spontaneous labour and laboured at home for a bit over a day, and that was all great. Everything felt normal. I felt really safe and confident. I knew that everything was well. But when we got to the hospital, everything just totally derailed from there, and they just didn't support me, like at all. From the second I walked in, they had this image in their head of me being really high risk, really stubborn because I hadn't conceded to an induction. And I think they just thought ahead of time that I was going to be difficult or like, I don't even know.
It's amazing how advocating for your own rights, there's this perception that you're being difficult. Like that just infuriates me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Because, in actuality, I was a complete people pleaser and I was trying so hard to hold the middle ground and to keep everyone happy, but like whilst also honouring myself. And they just viewed me as a troublemaker. And I wasn't a troublemaker. I just wanted to be left alone.
Yeah. Oh, that is so infuriating.
It really was. So yeah, they just didn't want to honour my wishes. I didn't want to have the CTG monitor because I wanted to move around, and I didn't want to have an IV lock-in because I didn't plan on needing IV at any point. I just wanted to move around, be left alone, and have my baby. And apparently that was too much for them. And, I was essentially coerced and worn down over the next few hours, and to the point where I'm fairly certain I was in transition. I hit that wall, like thinking to myself, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep holding them off anymore. I'm tired. It had been a long labour at that point. And I said to my partner, let's just have a C-section. I'm over this. I'm done. I've got nothing left. And for anybody else, I think the midwives would have known that was the moment to say to me, you're nearly there. Like, if you're saying you can't do this anymore, then you're nearly there. It's nearly done. I didn't get any of that. But what I did get was, you don't need to have a C-section. We'll give you an epidural. You can have some rest and you can try again for a vaginal birth tomorrow after you've had some sleep. So that's one very minor silver lining is that I did progress to have my vaginal birth. It wasn't the way I wanted at all, but I didn't have a C-section. And, again, in hindsight, that was probably because it was like 2 a.m. and the surgeon wasn't there. In reality, that's probably why they talked me out of that. So anyway.
Like they never had your interests in mind at all.
Absolutely not. No. Not at any point during the whole process,
And
I
not that
would
I
say.
was there, but it's so evident throughout your whole story that that was the case.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, that birth ended in a non-consensual use of forceps. By non-consensual, I mean I was literally screaming for them to stop, and a whole room full of people suddenly didn't speak English. Yeah, it was horrendous.
Oh my
My
God.
my first words to Bo was just begging for her to forgive me because I felt like I'd failed to protect her. Yeah, it was the most horrendous thing that's ever happened to me.
I am so sorry that that was your experience. And I am so horrified that in this day and age, these sort of practices are still happening and people are getting away with it as
Mm,
well. It's really sickening. And that the
it
fact that you
is.
weren't treated like a human being at all, it was like
Yeah.
everyone else's own agenda was being put first in this instance. And what they thought was best was coming before anything else. They didn't care who you were, they didn't care that you were a person. And they just treated you like
Mm.
shit. I'm sorry, but like that's horrific.
No, absolutely. It was like something out of a movie, when I don't know, it's the 50s and they strap them down for like electric therapy or that's how it felt. It
Yeah.
was just yeah, I felt like a dog or something, like just really subhuman in that moment.
Oh,
Yeah, I can talk about it now, but for years afterwards, I couldn't talk about it without just full body tension and shaking and crying. I'd just go straight back there every time I talked about it.
wow. I'm
Heavy
honestly just
stuff.
I hear I'm disgusted, yeah. And I've heard these stories before. Unfortunately, they're not unique. But this is
Mm.
again why I'm so passionate about helping women advocate for their rights and really pushing on even practitioners, informed consent. Like what's going on?
Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
that's my big question is just what is going on with you people?
yeah.
Because it's not all of them. My sister is a nurse and she's huge on letting the patients make decisions for themselves whether she agrees or not.
Yeah.
And how is that not the norm? Why is that a rarity? It baffles me.
Oh, totally. Totally. There's so much work still left to do in this space. So then
Mm.
coming from such a traumatic experience and then not planning for Freddie and Eugene, how did you feel when you fell pregnant?
Well, by that point, I'd already decided that I would be free birthing my next one. I think it was pretty shortly after having Bo that I had already decided I would never go to the hospital again. I think originally I did think I would hire a private midwife, but yeah, just the more research I did and the more I came to understand myself and the way things had played out through my first pregnancy and birth, I just realized that I did just want to stay home and be myself. I didn't even want a private midwife there. I didn't want to have anyone there who might sabotage me, who might not have as much faith in my body as I did, who might even just make me feel like watched. I didn't want to be watched. So, yeah, I think within 12 months of having Bo, I knew that I'd be free birthing the next one. So, at some point after having Bo as well, I'd say she was about 9 months old. I had an experience basically I was visited by a spirit baby. And at that point, I'd never heard of spirit babies. I didn't know this was a thing. It was very strange. I'm generally pretty cynical, so I'm not one of those people that goes looking for signs or believes in any of this kind of stuff usually.
Yeah.
So it was very weird. I was driving to my sister's house and I just had this voice come to me that said that I would have another baby at some point. It wouldn't be anytime soon because Bo needed her time and her name was Hazel and she will be back. Basically, it was very strange. For a while I questioned, like, did I make this up? Did I just imagine this? But how would I have even imagined this up? It was very strange. So, yeah, then when we got pregnant, I just took that as, that was Hazel. She'd chosen her time. It's weird because I wasn't actually I don't think I was mentally or physically ready to be pregnant again. But when I did find out I was pregnant, I just knew the timing was right and I trusted it. Yeah.
Oh, that's sort of beautiful in its own way. And then how are you feeling physically and emotionally throughout the pregnancy?
So it's funny because right before I got pregnant, I decided to actually face my birth trauma from Beau's birth, and I'd signed up to do EMDR therapy.
Yep.
So yeah, the first part of the pregnancy really was working through my birth trauma, and the whole pregnancy really was just leaning into trusting myself even deeper than I already did. Like an example of that is whenever I would do research or go reading different things, like my friend had given me a book from her doula that was like one of those handbooks for mums to be that has all the different info in it about the stages of labour and what to expect, ways to prepare your body, like eating dates and sitting on a birth ball and going for walks and just that general type of stuff. I remember reading that and just flipping through it and this feeling of anxiety coming up in me and thinking to myself like, oh, I'm not really doing any of this. I should probably start doing yoga and spinning babies, and maybe I should be watching what I'm eating a bit better. And it clicked with me in that moment that this noise was putting me out of touch with my intuition.
Yeah.
So I just closed that book and put it away. That was a great learning moment. Another way that I was able to unpack my first pregnancy, because that was happening so much that I wasn't aware.
Mm.
So there were lots of lessons through my second pregnancy like that, where I just really leaned deeper into what my body was telling me instead of what any external source was telling me. Yeah, so it was a great pregnancy.
And how powerful is that to just totally surrender and go into your intuition?
It was just great.
Yeah.
I don't know if I really have words. It's just the way it should be. Yeah, so that was pretty much a totally wild pregnancy. I did do a pregnancy test. So I say it's nearly totally wild, but something like a pregnancy test is an outside source. So, I would say that makes it not totally wild. And I did also have a doctor's appointment at 35 weeks. Yeah, I basically just saw her to confirm the pregnancy.
So then, because some of my next questions were, what was your perception of birth? But obviously you've had such a traumatic experience, and then you've decided to have this, somewhat wild pregnancy. How was the trauma sitting with you at this point? And what was your perception of birth? How was that evolving?
Well, I mean, even when my first birth was happening, I knew it was wrong. And my understanding of birth and the way it should be, even at that time, was that we should be left alone, basically, like any other mammal, just left alone to do our thing unless we genuinely need help. So I was already going into my second pregnancy with this mindset of undisturbed birth being safest. And yeah, I was very confident in birth, in physiological birth, and I was very confident that my body could do that, and that if anything went wrong or if there was a problem, that I would know about it because it's my body and I'll be the first to know, so I'll seek help as needed. So yeah, that was basically my whole plan, and I did try to prepare for emergency situations, but it was hard to do that in a way because there's so many emergencies that can come out of birth. There's so many emergencies that can come out of life, right?
Yeah.
We can get hit by a truck crossing the road, but we can't prepare for every situation where something might go wrong.
Mm.
So ultimately my gut was just sort of telling me that I will know if something is going wrong. I don't have to, I don't have to be an expert in every single way that might happen to know when an emergency is occurring. And if an emergency is occurring, my plan was that's when I will call emergency services. And that mirrors my plan in life.
Yeah. So then on that, did you have any fears about free birth?
I did have a few that came up, but mostly they were to do with, I think it was lingering stuff from my first birth a lot of the time. So one of the fears I had was, what if I pelvis is misaligned, and maybe that's the reason Bo was having such a hard time getting out and why they had to jump to forceps, because I did feel at parts of her labour that she was just not quite in the right position. I felt like her head was sort of stuck behind my right hip, something that really could have been solved with position changes.
Yeah.
I was mainly worried about sabotaging myself, I think. I didn't want to have another moment like during my first birth where I hit a wall and say, I can't do this anymore, and actually convince myself that I can't. I was really worried about that happening again.
Yeah.
So a lot of the fears were just variations of that cropping up again and again, I'd say. Like, what if my labour stalls? Yeah, what if my baby can't get into a good position? I actually got really worried at one point that, like, what if my bladder gets too full and it impedes the labour, and, like, I really don't want to have to call an ambulance just because I need a catheter. Like, that would disturb my entire birth over something so easily resolved.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in each case with the fears that were coming up, mostly my approach was to really embrace the fear, to sit with it, to treat the fear as like a friend and a guide, because I think these fears really have a lot to tell us. And if we just, instead of pushing them away and like trying to block our ears to them, if we just let them talk to us, maybe they're actually communicating something deeper to us. So, yeah, I would sit with them for a bit, try to sort of unpack them and figure out where they were coming from. And then ultimately I talked with my partner a ton. So he was hearing about like every EMDR therapy session. I'd come home and report to him what I'd worked through. And basically our relationship is just me telling him every single thought I've ever had ever. So it was like that during the pregnancy too. And so that really helped me work through a lot of fears, is just like voicing them seems to rob them of a lot of power. And then I would also write down the fear and then have a think about like the opposite of that fear. So if the fear was, what if my labour stalls? The opposite to that, like I would create an affirmation that was the opposite. So in that case, the affirmation might be something like, I have all the time in the world and my labour will progress at whatever pace it needs, something like that. And then I would burn the bit of paper that had the fear on it and hang on to the affirmation. So that practice really helped me to work through a lot of the fears as well. And then the big one that I couldn't work through was the full bladder thing. That cropped up a few times, and I did make an affirmation for it, but it just wasn't quite solving that one for me. It kept coming back. So in the end, I decided, well, if this were to happen during the labour and derail everything, like I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to research how to insert catheters, and I'm just going to order some and have them on hand. And then if it really does come up, then at least we can try to just take care of it ourselves. And then as soon as those catheters arrived, I just knew we would not need them. They were there for peace of mind.
Yeah.
And it did the trick that I didn't have that fear on my back anymore. So, yeah, I guess the short answer is there was like a lot of different methods.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be surprised if anyone, was going into a free birth or even a hospital birth or a private midwife, whatever your model of care might be, and you didn't have fears. It's so normal. And I love that process that you've gone through in terms of, rather than just trying to dismiss the fear, you've really worked with it and you've processed it and you've just done so much work. So I really love that. Did you tell your family and friends about your plans for a free birth? And if so, how did they receive that?
I did. I'm very close to my family. I've got 4 siblings and we all live in the same town and we see each other like every second day. So
oh, that's so nice.
Yes, it's really cool. So they knew pretty much as soon as I knew that I would be having a free birth for the next one, they were already looped in, and I was getting very passionate about physiological birth, and so they would listen to all my rantings and see everything I was sharing on Instagram. So they were already well aware that I was becoming that way inclined. So yeah, they did know that I was intending on having a wild pregnancy and free birth. and they were all really cool with it. I did have one sister who was more worried than the others, and I knew she would be, but I just hoped that they would be able to keep their fears to themselves. I knew that they might have fears, and that's okay. I just didn't want them offloaded onto me, and they were just really awesome about that. Nobody offloaded anything onto me the whole way. So, yeah, it was great. I didn't tell my partner's family because one of the things that I worked through, I worked through a lot of my people-pleasing tendencies. So after I had Beau and I first considered, well, what if we just stayed home for the next one? My very first reaction to that thought was, oh, but what will everyone say? What if people get worried? I'm going to have to convince them of why this is a good idea, and what am I going to tell Zave's mum? And maybe I should actually find out if are there any local midwives that think free birthing is a good idea? And it was at that point that I sort of realized, what am I doing? I'm still just looking for external validation. I'm looking for somebody else to tell me what's right for my body, or that I have to convince them.
Yeah.
I don't have to convince anyone.
Yes.
This is my body and my baby.
Yes.
That was a huge moment for me, and just realizing how much I really did always try to convince people of what was right for me instead of just doing it. So yeah, we didn't end up telling Zave's family. We didn't lie either, because I can't lie to save my life, but also I don't feel comfortable lying. So they knew we were having a home birth, and they didn't really ask too many questions. So I get along well with Zave's family, and generally they're not overly judgmental or critical, or that they weren't going to try and get involved. So we just told them things as needed. If any questions came up, we were honest, but we didn't sit them down to have a conversation or anything, because like I said, we don't need to convince anyone. This is just what we're doing.
That is exactly right. It is not your job to process other people's fears.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah. That was that. We just sort of followed the beat of our own drum, I think.
So then how did you prepare for your free birth? Because you mentioned earlier that you closed a book that you were given because you really wanted to tune in with your intuition. So did you end up relying on any resources to prepare?
I did. So I listened to a lot of free birth stories through different podcasts, and I'd say that was one of the biggest helps, because sometimes you just need to hear that there are other people out there like you who are thinking the same thoughts and feeling the same things, and it was reassuring. I even listened to a podcast episode that featured a lady who lost her baby during her free birth, and that one was incredible too, because it was so important to me to not put on blinders. I think there's a misconception sometimes that free birthers are selfish, that they're just trying to have the best birth for themselves, and that they're not thinking about their baby or their baby's safety.
Yeah, there's this misconception that you're irresponsible.
Yeah, definitely. And it's absolutely not true.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, it couldn't be further from the truth. All the free birthers I've heard from and listened to, and all the free birth stories I've heard, these are the people who are not covering their ears and putting on blinders and letting someone else just take care of it. No one was in charge of my health or my pregnancy or my safety other than me. And I accepted that responsibility. And it was great listening to this podcast, because this woman basically said, so yeah, she chose free birth. She had a wonderful free birth, but unfortunately, I think her baby had there was something wrong with baby's heart, or they called an ambulance, but they weren't able to save the baby. And it was so sad, and they faced so much judgment from their family and friends, but she still stood by her choices, and she knew that she did all that she could. And that's all anyone can hope for. She knew that she chose the place that was safest for her and her baby, but sometimes in life, there's no guarantees. So she was able to reflect on everything and still say, I stand by my choices, I did my best. So I was sort of going into it with my eyes wide open, and knowing that there was no guarantee at the end of it. I knew that I might be re-traumatized. I might be traumatized worse than my first birth, but I knew in my heart and my soul that this was the right choice for us. And I think that's all anyone can do is follow what's best for them. That's all anyone ever should do.
Yeah, totally. Wow, what a lot to work through and a lot to process. So, did you decide in the end to have a doula or a birth keeper?
No, no, and that was actually a decision I wasn't expecting of myself. After my first birth, my opinion was that nobody should ever birth without a doula and that you need to have an advocate there. So I had originally thought before conceiving that there was no way I would ever go into another birth without an advocate there. But then we did meet with a local doula and she was great, and we were on the same page about everything free birth, and she was also a birth photographer, and I'm a photographer, so I very much value photos, and especially of like a big moment like this. So I really thought for sure like we'll hire her because I value the photography and I value the advocacy. But I think ultimately we just kind of didn't click with her, and there was no reason why we shouldn't have. Everything was right on paper, but yeah, we just didn't click. And so it took me a few weeks to sort of make a decision about that. And yeah, ultimately I sort of realized like I can't have someone there that I'm not clicking with. Like every time I visualized her at my birth, it just, or I would be picturing my birth and everything's going along. We're at home, we're safe and we're cozy. Oh, and now it's time to call the doula, and will I ask her to go into another room, or will I still feel weird just knowing that she's in the house? And eventually I just realized like, what am I doing? Like, even in my imagination, I'm not comfortable having someone else there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had to figure out if that was just me being hyper independent, because I do have a tendency to do that. I think it's what led me down the path I went down with my first birth, was me being turned down by the birth centre and saying to myself, well, if they won't have me and if they don't believe in me, that's fine. I can do it by myself. And ultimately, you can't like face like an army of people who don't support you by yourself.
Oh, totally.
So, that was never going to work. That sort of independence didn't serve me in that scenario.
Yeah.
So I had to decide if I was doing that again or if it really was the right choice for me. And ultimately I realized I wasn't doing that because it wasn't about pushing people away. It was about bringing in the people who needed to be there and who I felt safe around. And ultimately, I knew that I felt safest by myself. And even at one point I considered not having my partner there. I thought maybe I actually want to just do this completely alone. So I had to like visualize all these different scenarios and decide who I genuinely wanted there and who I genuinely needed. And I knew that I didn't need anyone. So then it was about who I wanted. And I knew I wanted Zave to be there and I wanted Bo to be there. And if we needed any extra support, I had a couple of sisters that I could have called in to, watch Bo or that kind of thing. But yeah, I just wanted to keep it in the family.
Yeah. And so was your partner supportive of your decision to free birth?
He was, yeah. He's great. He trusts me to make my own decisions. He knows that I know myself best, so he was supportive the whole way. Like, he admitted at times that he had taken some convincing or that he did have fears that surrounding it, but he knew that those were his responsibility to work through. So he never offloaded any fears onto me either, which was great. But yeah, his opinion was like, it's your body, it's your choice.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, before we get into your birth story, I just wanted to clarify something too. Did you know that you were pregnant with twins?
I didn't.
Oh, exciting!
I had no idea. I assumed that it was the spirit baby, Hazel. So I was adamant that we were having a girl. I felt like such a deep connection to her, and she did talk to me a few more times during the pregnancy too. So, of course, I just took it for granted that she was talking to me from the womb. Yeah, it's so surreal. And it's been a weird thing to work through actually, because when boys came out, I didn't know them at all. They were just little strangers. They were so quiet in there that I hadn't got any connection or like sense of their personality during their time in the womb, which was totally different to how Bo's pregnancy was. And when she came out, it was like there were no surprises. She was exactly who I thought she would be.
Yeah.
So this has been a strange experience of like getting to know these boys. And even now, they're mysterious. They're sort of mysterious little boys. You look in their eyes and it's like they've got little secrets about the universe that they're not going to tell you.
I love that. I love that description. You've just come so far from your journey with Bo to then a free birth with twins that you didn't even know about, surprise twins. And then this journey of, because you had this spirit baby talking to you and then trying to connect with them after the birth and bond with them when it's just so far from what you expected. It's just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
It's such a like a funny juxtaposition to me that I was like so in tune with my body, but also in some ways so oblivious.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, like hindsight's a wonderful thing. There were definitely signs, and we did joke about it, like the whole pregnancy, because yeah, I felt movement from like 9 weeks. And I remember saying to Zave, like, it's so early, but I can definitely feel like flutters. And with Bo, I didn't feel any movement until about 22 weeks. So that's a big difference.
Yeah.
And then I was also like just a lot bigger with this second pregnancy. But I know that some people are just bigger the second time around, so I sort of just brushed that off. But the other big one was whenever I would try belly mapping to like figure out the position, I just had no idea what was going on. And it was sort of driving me nuts. Because, like, I would say to Zabe, like, how can I be so in tune with my body, but when I touch my belly, I can't tell what's going on, and it's just sort of driving me nuts because I know I'm the expert of my body, so, like, why can't I figure this out?
Yeah.
And I would even get my sister to try and help me. I'd be like, can you feel my belly and see what's going on? And she couldn't really either, and, like, sometimes it felt like there was a spine on this side, but also a spine on this side, and legs up here, but also legs down here. And like, I just figured I just had to assume that I was just really bad at it.
Yeah.
And then my partner would say, oh, maybe it's twins. And we would both go, oh, yeah, maybe it's twins. But it just seemed something so unlikely, so implausible, that I didn't even give it any real thought. Because I think part of me was like, I can't let myself think, oh, but what if it is twins? And then when one baby comes out, I'll feel so stupid for even like thinking it might not be. So I did not put any energy into that. I was like, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to even go there.
And did twins
So
run in your
funny.
family at all?
We didn't think they did. So every time this came up, we'd be like, oh, but there's no twins on either side of our family.
Yeah.
We've since found out there's twins on both sides of our family. Like distant cousins and things.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's get into your birth story. So how are you feeling towards the end of your pregnancy, and roughly how many weeks were you when you went into labour?
So I'd say the last month of the pregnancy, I knew that we only had a few weeks left, and that was weird because with Bo I went to 43 weeks, so I was prepared for another long haul. So then when it got to about 34 weeks, and I was like, yeah, I feel like in the same headspace as I did at the end of the last pregnancy. I feel like things are winding down. I'm feeling nesting urges, but it's so soon. I just sort of brushed that off as well because I thought maybe my dates were wrong. Maybe I've miscalculated. I might be further ahead. But yeah, I knew that just intuitively that we were getting close to the end. So yeah, the day of the birth, we'd just finished setting everything up the night before. So my partner had blown up the birth pool. I'd put up I had like affirmations and photos and things that I did like a wall altar. So everything was now set. We had like everything we needed, and basically baby's welcome to come anytime from here because we're ready to go. So that happened the night before.
Wow.
And then, yeah, on the day, so I think it was around 2 p.m. that I went to have a lay down and had a nap. And when I woke up, I went to go to the toilet and my waters broke. And that didn't happen with Bo. So that was cool to have like a different part of the story, I guess.
Yeah.
Because other than that, there were similarities to Bo's labour, because I also, with Bo, had my first contraction after an afternoon nap.
Okay.
So it was sort of the same again. I had an afternoon nap and I woke up and things got going. So yeah, my waters broke and they were just sort of leaking. It wasn't like a big gush. It was just leaking every now and again, pretty continuously. And we had a photo session booked with a photographer for that afternoon. So, and she was doing it remotely, so it was all like through the phone because she lives in a different state. So it's kind of like photography through video call, I suppose. So yeah, we did that, and the whole time I was still just like leaking fluid. Other than that, things were just cruisy. I knew that it might take a while for things to get going. So yeah, we did our shoot, and then we got takeaway for dinner and put on some Law and Order SVU and totally not appropriate for Bo to be watching that, but that's what we were watching.
Yeah.
And yeah, then she went to bed. Well, I think I had my first like gentle contraction during dinner, and I was just sitting on my birth ball, and it felt like a cramp sort of like emanating out from my lower back. Very gentle, just very mild at that point. So that was around 5:30, I think. And then yeah, Bo got ready for bed and Save took her to bed, and I was still texting my sister at that point, so I know that at around 8 p.m. I sent her a message saying, oh, it feels like things are moving pretty slowly. Yeah, maybe we're in for another long one, but I am having to like pause through them now, so like I'm having to stop and breathe through them. And I don't know why I thought things were moving slowly, because from the very first mild contraction, they were like consistently 10 minutes apart, which was like nowhere near as slow as Bo's was.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was my last text to her at about 8 o'clock. And then like my phone was, I don't know where it was after that, because I was in labour. So I think Save started filling up the birth pool, and I think I moved to the bed for a little while to labour on the bed, and by then I'm like vocalising through the contractions. Then I wasn't timing any of them, but they were closer together, I'd say every 3 to 5 minutes. And yeah, I had to make a couple of trips to the toilet to like clear out my bowels, and that walk down the hallway was so difficult. I was having to stop like every 3 steps for a contraction. I thought I would try labouring on the toilet for a little bit, but it was just, I don't know why I don't like labouring on the toilet. It's really uncomfortable for me.
I'm the same. I mean, I've heard it's the dilation station, but I couldn't bear it.
Yeah, I just find it really physically uncomfortable. And the same thing happened with Bo too. So I think I had like 1 contraction on the toilet and I was like, nah, this ain't it. So yeah, I went back to the bedroom and the birth pool was still filling, but I think I got in there at that point. Laboured in there for a bit, and around midnight, Bo woke up and came to our room, and she was great. Like, we didn't really know how she would respond during the labour. We did a lot of we talked with her a lot about how things would be, and me and her watched some birth videos together, and she knew what to expect. But she can also be like super mischievous, and especially when there's something going on that's got our attention, like our full attention, and it's not on her.
Yeah.
So we thought, is she just going to start acting up the whole time? But she was really good. She just laid on the bed. I think she knew that I needed just peace and quiet, I guess, because she wasn't a disturbance at all. She just like curled up on the bed and rested there, and eventually she fell back asleep. So yeah, labouring in the pool, and things were getting pretty intense at that point. They were pretty back-to-back contractions every minute or two. And at the end of each one, I was just saying, oh, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't do another one. But then another one would come and I would get through it. So I was sort of at that point. And then around that point, I remembered like my affirmations that I had on the wall. So I clung on to some of those, and every time a contraction would overwhelm me, I'd stand there going, surrender, I surrender. Like waving my little white flag. But after a few contractions like that, it sort of dawned on me that I was saying that I surrendered, but I wasn't actually surrendering to it. I was still at that point where I was like, oh, I don't want to go through the pain. I don't want to lean into it. Like I was trying to escape the process, I suppose. And then like my follow-on thought was like, okay, well, what's holding me back from really just collapsing into this? And I remember opening my eyes and saying to Zave, I think I'm scared of the pushing process, because I didn't get that stage with Bo. Once I had the epidural, and they told me, like, you're 10 centimeters dilated and we're going to start coached pushing, I couldn't feel anything. So from like that whole first birth, I was sort of robbed of that. Once I had that realization, and I don't even remember what Zave said to me. He was the perfect birth partner. Like, he just knew that he had to stand back and just let me do it. So he was really quiet and just sort of like in the background of the room. And if I signaled that I wanted water or that I wanted like a rub on the back, or, you know, he would just come over and do it. But the rest of the time he was just sort of standing back and just letting it unfold, and he was ready if he was needed. So yeah, when I said that to him, I don't even actually remember what he said back, but it was just something along the lines of like, you're doing great. And that was all I needed.
Yeah.
And then I just like closed my eyes and got back to it. So it's weird. As soon as I had that realization of what was holding me back, I went from like that sort of phase of like really vocalizing through the contractions and needing to sort of move through them. And after I closed my eyes again, it was just breathing down. Every contraction, I didn't need to vocalize anymore. It was just really breathing and like low moaning sort of sounds, I guess. And then I was using a couple more of my affirmations. It was really like meditative. I was just breathing through them and going slow, soft. And I could feel the baby's head like moving down through me at this point. So I was just really still. I was on my hands and knees in the pool, and I can only compare it to a bowel movement, I guess. Like,
yeah.
If for anyone who's ever been constipated and had to like really focus, that's kind of how it is. You have to like let your body relax really slowly and just sort of let it do its thing in its own natural time. So I was just breathing through it and like letting my body do what it needed to do at that point, and just staying really still and focusing on my breath and on staying relaxed. And then at the apex of each contraction, I was getting these overwhelming pushing urges, which I guess is, and again, to make another comparison, it felt really similar to when you need to vomit and you feel like your stomach churning, and then you sort of get that sort of heaving urge, and you don't always vomit straight away, but like you can feel that sensation taking over your body as it wants to purge. And it was a really similar sensation at the top of each contraction. It was just like this heaving that I had no control over. Well, I say I had no control over. I could either stand back and let it happen, or I could try and like resist it and try to like stifle it. So I was doing my best to not stifle it, and it's scary because you think it's going to hurt, and sometimes it does hurt a little bit, but I really had to just relax enough to like let it take me over. Yeah, so then it's all such a blur to me now. Like, I think I might have reached down and felt the head as it was coming out, but I also don't know if I imagined that later. I think I did. It's so surreal. It feels like being drunk and then trying to remember everything from the night before. Like, it's such a haze to me now. I was like so high on all the endorphins and the birth hormones that I just don't even really remember. But yeah, it got to the point where I felt the head pop out, and I instinctively got up onto like a bit more upright, just onto one knee, and the body just came straight out after. And yeah, I caught him in the water, and the cord was a lot shorter. Bo had a really long cord. The midwife said it was the longest they'd ever seen. So I was expecting, not to have to worry about that. But yeah, he came out and his cord was quite short. And yeah, I lifted him up gently out of the water, and I saw his little face, and I didn't know it was a boy yet. But yeah, I saw his face for the first time, and I was like, oh, you're not who I was expecting. I just immediately knew that this was not Hazel. This was not who I thought was coming. So, yeah, that was, again, just so different. I'd been picturing this birth for so long, and I thought it would be like when I met Bo. And, I mean, it was horrible when I met Bo, the context around it, but actually, like, looking into her eyes and meeting her and falling in love with her instantly, I was expecting all that again. But, yeah, I looked into his eyes and I was like, oh, okay. Hello, stranger.
Did you know it was a boy at this point too?
Not yet, no.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, I just held on to him and sort of took a beat, I suppose. And, yeah, so I just held on to him and, like, had a bit of a pause. I remember, like, the first thought that crossed my mind in that moment was, oh, my God, that was actually quite difficult. I never want to do that again. And so he was born at, I think it was 2:43 a.m. And, yeah, then I'd asked Dave to wake Bo up when I knew he was close to coming out, because whenever we'd ask her, she always said she wanted to be woken up if she was asleep.
Yeah.
So she got to watch her brother be born, and then I checked and saw that it was a boy. So I told her she had a little brother. She got into the pool with me to meet him, and, yeah, it was all just very, very sweet. But I was just distracted. And again, it was not what I was expecting. I thought we were done aside from the placenta, but
Yeah.
I couldn't really connect. So it was Eugene who came out first, and, yeah, I just couldn't really connect with him in the moment and couldn't really take any of it in. I was just so distracted still, and I was shivering. I, like, got really overwhelmed with the shivers, so I hopped out of the pool and climbed into the bed to warm up and try to feed Jean, and, like, going through the motions of trying to start bonding and having, like, that golden hour, and I didn't realise, but I was still in labour. So, yeah, I was having trouble, like, focusing on anything. And then then I got my first, what I thought was an afterbirth pain, and what was actually a contraction. And it completely overwhelmed me. So I was lying on my left side in the bed, which I was probably really not the best position for labouring, especially for me. Like, I have to be on my hands and knees or standing.
Yeah.
So it was so painful, and, like, it was excruciating. And at the end of it, I was like, whoa, my sister wasn't kidding when she said the afterbirth pains are worse the second time round. So I asked Dave to mix me up some of my placenta release and afterbirth pain tinctures, which he did, and I drank them and pretty much immediately vomited them back up.
Oh my God.
And that's a sign of transition, but I was so out of this world that it didn't occur to me. So, yeah, for the next, I'd say about 50 minutes, I was still in labour and just completely unaware. Every minute or two, these absolutely horrendous contractions, like I was holding onto the headboard of the bed and just screaming the house down. I was actually very close to saying to Zave, like, can you stick a note on the door in case someone calls the police, like, home birth in process, because we forgot to do that. Because I was screaming so loud, I really was starting to get worried about, like, waking up all the neighbours. And, yeah, at some point I said to Zave, like, can we please cut the cord for Eugene, because, like, and you have to take him because I need to get this placenta out. I'm not going to be able to relax until it's out. Like, I was thinking that that's what the problem was, that the afterpains were just so bad because the placenta had to come out.
Yeah.
And I tried, like, gently putting some traction on the cord a couple of times, or getting upright to squat to see if it would come out, and just no luck at all. So that's why I stayed on the bed for a long time, and, like, I just thought it was the placenta trying to come out and it wasn't ready yet. And then eventually the contractions were, like, so close together and so painful that I was like, right, I have to get upright. I've got to see if this placenta's ready to come out. So I just sat up really quickly and, like, squatted off the edge of the bed, because I only had, I don't know, like 10 seconds between these two contractions. I had to move really quickly. Yep, squatted off the edge of the bed. And like, I'd been having pushing urges this whole time as well. And I just thought that was normal. Like, they must continue to get the placenta out. So, yeah, squatted down, and with just one push urge, what I thought was the placenta just came, like, straight out. And it came out so easily. Like, I didn't feel a head and shoulders. So I'm not sure if Freddie was breech or if he was like still in his birth sac. I don't really know what was going on, but it felt
Yeah.
very different to how Eugene came out. He really just felt like a great big blob just sliding out. Like I was certain it was a placenta.
Yeah.
And yeah, I took another beat and I was like, oh my God, it's done. It's finally out of me, I can breathe, and came back down to earth when I heard Zave saying, quick, pick him up, it's another baby. And I looked down and there's this second baby. And yeah, it was completely surreal. Like, I imagine you hear these stories of women who don't know they're pregnant and then suddenly there's like a baby there. That's sort of how it felt.
Yeah.
Like, it was so just utterly surreal, bizarre, crazy. And yeah, me and my partner just like cracked up laughing. Like, there was nothing else for it. The universe played a very good joke and we were just laughing.
So was he birthed onto the floor just to
So
check, or did you have a little bowl there or something?
we had like some mats down under the pool and they
Okay.
extended out a bit. So he was really lucky he landed on one of the mats instead of on the floorboards.
Yeah, okay.
Poor little boy. But that's how he got his name, because we had Eugene because that was my favourite boy's name. So when we had to suddenly like do a U-turn, and because we thought we were having a girl, so we'd picked a girl's name.
Yeah.
We hadn't even thought about boys' names. So we did this U-turn and I was like, well, Eugene's the boy's name that I've always had picked, so this is Eugene. And then when the second one came out, we were like, well, we don't have a second boy's name. And I figured Dave should pick this one because I hogged the first. And yeah, he picked Freddie because Fred fell on his head. Which it's particularly funny because we don't even know if he did. Like,
yeah.
Nobody really saw him come out, so we don't know if he was head first or butt first or what was going on.
Wow. What an incredible experience. So then how did you embrace that moment? How did you try and process what had just happened?
It was just really joyous. It was just so exciting, like, completely unexpected. Never in my wildest dreams had I ever, like, I'm not one of those people that ever, like, hoped for twins or fantasized about twins. They were not on my radar even a little bit. So then to have these two boys, it was completely wild. But, like, in the best way. It was just an incredible surprise. That there's so few, like, big surprises like that when you're an adult.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, it was just, yeah. Just the best surprise of my entire life.
Totally.
So yeah, and Bo, she was so tired, poor girl. And she'd been bonding a lot with Eugene and really connecting with him, and then when this second baby came out and I said, you've got two brothers, she just had this look on, like, totally blank look on her face, like she didn't know how to react. She didn't know if this was a prank. Like, she just looked way too tired for this shit.
Yeah.
So yeah, after Freddie was out, I tried to, like, lay down again and to actually start thinking about the placenta coming out. And I was having pretty continuous little gushes of blood. So I laid down because I knew that being horizontal would probably help with that. But I wasn't having any more contractions. And yeah, the gushing was, like, pretty continuous. It was every time I moved even a little bit, I'd feel some more come out. And within about 30 minutes, the bed was just drenched in blood. I was still feeling okay. I was riding the birth high. But yeah, I was a little bit concerned about the amount of blood. I know that sometimes it can be normal though, so I was really just going off how I was feeling. So yeah, I thought I'd sit up again and try to see if the placenta was ready, and squatted off the edge of the bed again, and some, like, chunks came out. And we didn't know at the time, but they were blood clots. But some of them were quite large. There was one that was, like, as big as a fist. So I had no idea what they were. I just assumed my placenta might have been, like, coming out in pieces. So yeah, I said to Dave, I don't actually think this is normal. I think we should call an ambulance now.
Mm.
But it was all very calm, and one of my fears during the pregnancy had been, what if I have to transfer back to that hospital, because it's the same hospital that was Beau's birth, and obviously I do not want to go back there. But yeah, so that was a fear I'd had to work through, and I'd decided that because I was scared of coming away feeling disempowered again and feeling like I'd failed, so I figured that the only way to avoid that was to really be in control of all my choices, and that if I did feel like I needed to transfer, that decision had to come from me, and that's the only way for it to not feel like a failure, was that knowing that I'd made all my own choices and that they hadn't been made for me.
Mm.
So I actually kind of surprised myself when I was just like, yeah, call the ambulance. And I felt really cool, wasn't concerned, didn't have any fear or trepidation about that or resistance, because I was worried that if an emergency happened, maybe would I be too, like, scared of the hospital to call them in that moment. But yeah, it didn't happen. I knew that we'd gone off the path of what was normal for me, and now was the time to reach out for help, and I was just totally cool with that. And yeah, so I just settled back on the bed and we called the ambulance, and they were there within like under 10 minutes. And yeah, so that whole experience was positive. I think I didn't feel any judgment from any of the paramedics about free birthing. Everyone was just so excited about it being twins.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah, maybe it was like our excited energy and the fact that we were very upbeat and positive, I don't know, but everyone was just really like it was just still so happy through the whole process. So yeah, they did a lot of fundal massage and stuff, which was horrible. Very painful. 10 out of 10, do not recommend.
Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, again, hindsight's a wonderful thing. I wonder if it was even necessary. Maybe I could have actually asked them to stop, I don't know. But at that point, I'd reached out to them for help, so I was just letting them do what they needed to do. And I did actually ask them to pause a couple of times because I needed to have a break. It was very painful, and they did stop when I asked them to stop. So yeah, then we were in the ambulance, and by then I'd been losing, the blood still hadn't stopped. So yeah, in the ambulance, they decided to do fundal compression. So it's the same as fundal massage, except they just hold it. They basically just push really hard on your belly and hold firm. And that was just blinding pain. Like, I actually couldn't breathe. It was so painful and overwhelming that I couldn't catch my breath. And I was like telling them to stop. I'm like, stop, please. Like, I can't breathe. I need you to stop so I can catch my breath. And they were like, no, sorry, we have to do this. You've got 3 little ones now that, we need to keep you alive. And it felt all very dramatic, but
yeah,
they gave me some fentanyl, and I calmed down after that because I couldn't feel the pain anymore. This all sounds really scary and dramatic, but I was still just so happy, and like, I knew that I'd called them for help. So even though I was in a lot of pain and asking them to stop, I also knew that it was what was needed to be done. So
yeah,
I didn't have any fear of anything. I just wanted that placenta out. And I had intuitively, I just felt like it wasn't coming on its own. I hadn't had any contractions. I'd tried putting a bit of traction on the cord with no luck. Like, it just really was not coming out. I don't know if it was just the surprise of having twins, or because it was a totally undisturbed birth. So I'm not sure what triggered it. I didn't have any fear around, at that point, I didn't have any unresolved fear or anything that would have kept the placenta there. So I have to just assume that it was the surprise of the twins that maybe disturbed the process a bit. But anyway, ended up at the hospital, and they put me under general anesthetic and removed the placenta by hand. And I was in hospital for a couple of days after that. They estimated about 1.4 litres, which is not that bad. It is considered a hemorrhage, but it's definitely not the worst. So I was surprised by that. I thought it was going to be more. And that was including like what they'd estimated at home as well, just from like looking at the scene. But I had a couple of blood transfusions, and then I was good to go, and I recovered quite quickly. This postpartum has been like infinitely better than the first one.
Oh, that's so nice. So that was going to be my next question was, how's your overall postpartum experience going?
Yeah, it's been really great. I hadn't realised, because I don't think, after having Bo, I don't feel like I had postnatal depression or anxiety or anything, but I definitely had, the post-birth baby blues, hormones all over the place, and I was having a lot of, especially in the first couple of weeks, just flashbacks to the birth. I was really haunted by it for a good couple of years, but especially in those immediate weeks and months after having Bo, I would just find myself totally zoning out. What do you call it? Like disassociating.
Yeah, disassociating or disembodiment, like
Yeah.
totally disconnecting from your body.
Yeah, so that sort of thing was happening a lot of just bouts of crying. But after the boys, and I thought that was normal because of the hormones, that your emotions would be up and down regardless of any trauma. But I haven't had any weepiness or bouts of crying or mood swings. There's been moments where I've been, overstimulated or tired after a long day, that kind of thing. But I hadn't realised just how emotional I was the first time compared to this time. And I feel like I've been really well supported. Once everyone found out it was twins, all my siblings really rallied to bring food over, and I've got a couple of old sisters that have young boys. I think their boys are both 7 months now. So I've had like lots of hand-me-downs because we didn't have any boys' clothes. So adamant was I that it was a girl, I didn't even bother buying anything for boys. And yeah, we had to organise an extra car capsule and an extra bassinet and like just all this stuff that we didn't know we would need, and everyone came together and helped out. And my mum moved in with us for a couple of weeks, so that was super helpful. Just having someone around to help out with Bo and do some dishes and some washing, that kind of thing, was, massive help. So, felt very well supported this time round too. Yeah, it's been awesome.
Oh, I love that. So I've absolutely loved hearing your journey, and I hate to wrap things up, but my last question for you is, what advice, if any, do you have for other mothers considering a free birth based on your journey, or just advice in general to do with pregnancy, birth, or postpartum?
I think my best advice is really just to trust yourself. And that can be hard, I think, especially as women in our society, where we're taught from very early on to not trust ourselves in all areas. We're taught to fixate on our weight or to rely on hormonal birth control instead of learning about our cycles. And we're just sort of basically taught to distrust our bodies at every turn. So my advice would be to really like shut out all that noise and to look for it when it happens and just tune back into what your body's telling you. It's not always easy and it takes practice, but your body, even when you think it's working against you, like your body is so wise, it's always trying to help you, even in mysterious ways. It's got its own system. It's trying to help you and to tell you things. And I just think, just really learn to listen and honour that as much as possible.
Totally. I love that advice. Well, thank you so much, Georgia, for sharing your story on the Mama Village podcast. I've absolutely loved having you on.
Well, thank you for having me. I've loved chatting about it. Still just makes me so happy to be able to talk about it.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Mama Village podcast. Check out the show notes for a link to the Mama Village Instagram page where I upload pregnancy, birth, postpartum and motherhood resources. Please let me know what you think of today's show and what you would like to hear from the podcast by leaving a rating and review. If you like the show, please subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform. If you would like to share your positive pregnancy, birth, postpartum and motherhood story, or if you have education in the space to share, please send me a direct message on Instagram or email the.mamavillage@outlook.com. For all my listeners out there, thank you for your continuing support, and I will speak to you all in next week's episode.